Move on to this story now. Zulu Kingdom think tank Indonsa Yesizwe is calling for an end to speculation about the state of the relationship between King Misuzulu kaZwelithini and his Prime Minister, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. The organization says it is worthy to note that the king was indeed in hospital in Eswatini and that there is no need to dispute this and cause media sensationalism. It's calling for the long-awaited meeting between the king and Buthelezi to take place as soon as possible. Let's speak now to Indonsa Yesizwe founder, Professor Musa Xulu. Professor, where are we right now in as far as the tension, if I can call it that, between the king and the prince?
Well, good afternoon, my brother. No, the tension is ongoing because I think there are people that are fueling it on both sides, maybe more so on the side of somebody called Prince Africa, who almost every day is on some kind of media berating Buthelezi and so on. And of late, we have even had very strange and unhistorical utterances that there's nothing called office of the traditional prime minister in the Zulu Kingdom. Now that's false and very false, but this peddling of false history is actually, from where we are, looks like is wanting to weaken the Zulu Kingdom in a manner that maybe we could be walking towards the end of it as it used to be. The tension, we believe, that can only be addressed if Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the traditional prime minister, he's occupying a post that his great-grandfather occupied. It has been there since the times of Shaka, so there's no disputing that. It's part of indigenous knowledge systems of Africa, and it fits in very well with decolonization, thinking about how our political systems were before colonization. And then on the other hand, we know that His Majesty is sitting on the throne of the Zulu Kingdom, one of the most celebrated kingdoms in the world. The brand Zulu, the brand Shaka Zulu, etc. is well known. We are concerned that this is going to become eroded through peddling of false history and through maybe some of the traditional leadership issues being politicized by political parties.
And when we speak about that history, when you listen to the prince speak about the king, he's ever so humble, if I can use those words, and he is never ever berating the king. So I imagine that the murmurs from the corridors within the monarch are causing all of this tension, and it's not going to end anytime soon, is it?
Well, it may not end anytime soon because it has been now, taken to the political arena. And you're right when you say that the Prime Minister has never really berated the king, especially in public. You must remember that traditional leadership systems and institutions are based on the issue that you have to keep the traditions of the people, and they're always looking backwards. It's the same as the church and the criminal justice system and all of those institutions, which you cannot just shake overnight without causing a lot of harm to them. So we're calling that the traditions need to be maintained. Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi is still the Prime Minister to His Majesty the King. His Majesty the King is still the King of Zulu. Both should simply come together and talk about the issues of the Zulu Kingdom. How do we get young people to get jobs? How do we get eradicate rural poverty in the Ingonyama Trust land? How do we start talking about cultural heritage and how we can use the Zulu cultural heritage to grow the heritage and tourism economy in the province? The issue that His Majesty was in hospital or was not in hospital, once it was announced that he was in hospital, we, the Zulu people, assumed that he was in hospital. I don't know why it is necessary to come up guns blazing to dispute such a thing as that first statement was aiming at getting the Zulu people to pray for His Majesty the King. Now, you never dismiss a prayer in any way. So it became so unnecessary to start issuing parallel statements And then even this morning, you get strange history being paraded in some news platforms. You start asking yourself, why? Why would you attack Zulu history if you're a true African yourself?
And of course, Professor, when we speak about history, this is something you are very knowledgeable on. Is there a great disconnect in present day Zulu monarch with its people, with young people, if you compare it to the other monarchs around the world, within Southern Africa, within the continent, and globally as well?
Well, what we saw in 2021 and 2022, when the present Zulu king was ascending the throne, the cultural basis and all the institutions and structures that support the kingdom and the kingship were activated. And there was a lot of interest, really, even among urban Zulus and non-Zulu people around the monarch. I must also say the monarch and the monarchy. I must also say that there's a lot of interest in monarchies at SADC, because you'll find that in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, Mozambique, those people left from here in the 1800s when King Shaka was busy forming the Zulu Kingdom in a very, very volatile manner. Some left here in their groups and started new kingdoms there. But what they say now is that they want to re-establish, and they've been saying this even with the previous king who passed on in 2021, to re-establish the lines of communication with the original Zulu Kingdom, and some of them really still consider themselves to be Zulus. Now, when it comes to globally, it's often said that there's a lot of interest in knowing more about the Zulu Kingdom. I myself have been interviewed by radio and TV stations from many parts of the world just to explain how this kingdom is structured, what is the history behind it, how was it formed, about how many people, what is the current thinking now compared to the 1800s and the 1900s. So you can see that there's a lot of interest in this. That's why we in Indonsa Yesizwe say we cannot afford a situation where this is dismantled overnight, over a point that the king was at hospital or was not at hospital, really.
I get you, Professor, and that's the exact question, right? It almost sounds rhetorical, if you will. Let's talk about then this meeting that needs to happen between the king and the prince. When are we likely going to see that? And I'm not asking for a timeline, but realistically speaking, in the context of everything that has transpired just in the last week and a half or so, when is it going to happen?
Well, it should happen soon. On Monday, around 12 noon, His Majesty the King called me just to get my views, because as an analyst, I may come up with angles that people may not be aware of. And as we were talking, he then told me that I must drop because Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi was calling him. I now believe that maybe they have started talking about how to meet, because when you release multiple media statements that clash in the content and fight among each other, you confuse the public. You must now remember also that many people regard traditional leadership systems as part of their daily identity. So the confusion itself causes a lot of restlessness, at least in terms of how people, and anxiety about the future. Remember, this is KZN. Once it started drifting to the political arena on Monday and Tuesday, we began to be very worried, because we know that people here can quite easily drag everything to some kind of violence. So I can say that there is hope that the meeting is going to happen soon. I did pen a letter also to Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi in the name of Indonsa Yesizwe to ask that if it can be possible for this meeting to happen. This meeting is the only thing that makes sense, that can help stop this whole fracas that we're currently witnessing.
Professor, thank you so much for making time to chat to us this afternoon here on Today. Indonsa Yesizwe founder Professor Musa Xulu live to us. Let's move on to the